Welcome to the Nickolas Natali Show, where we chat with entrepreneurs, experts, and entertainers to help you live a more fulfilling life and take your business to the next level. Today, we're chatting with Jason Feifer. Jason Feifer is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, a podcast host, book author, keynote speaker, startup advisor, and nonstop optimism machine. His goal is to help you become more resilient and adaptable in a world of constant change so you can seize new opportunities before anyone else does. Before we dive in, please subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening on and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And share this episode with a friend that you know would benefit from it. Believe it or not, your shares and reviews help me reach out to guests, which in turn will bring you more value on how to live a fulfilling life. Riddle of the week: how much does it cost to swim with sharks? Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out. That was the intro. Now here is the episode. Hello and welcome. This is the Nickolas Natali Show. I am your host, Nickolas Natali. Today we have a very special guest, Jason Feifer. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you. Here's where I want to start.
Sure.
2018.
Yeah.
You co-wrote a rom-com novel with your wife.
I did.
I'm going to say Mr. Nice Guy. That's not the name of your wife. That is the name of the book.
That's correct.
And from that experience, you realize that entrepreneurs, they think vertically, while non-entrepreneurs have a tendency to think horizontally. Vertically meaning each action is a building block to the next one, and so they stack on top of each other, if you will. And after spending 1 hour a day for 9 months, you birthed Build for Tomorrow, another book baby. And the question you highlighted in the book to evaluate our actions is, what is this for? So in regards to your career, specifically, what is this book, Build for Tomorrow, for?
Well, you took people on quite a journey there. So what is this book for? So my goal, personally and professionally, is to build a recognizable platform for myself that isn't anchored to something that I don't own, right? So like my great honor is being editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, but it is also my great challenge because I don't own Entrepreneur Magazine. And so I have always been mindful that as I go out and represent the brand and take part in all the good things that come with it, that I also figure out what do I mean to people separate from that so that everything about me isn't tied up in something that I don't own. This is just, I think, common sense that anybody should be thinking about as they think about what transferable value they have in the world. And so the book for me was really an effort to try to explore what is my specific area of expertise that lives inside the entrepreneurship universe, but also can go outside of it. What is the platform that I stand on myself? Books also, for what it's worth, happen to be a great way to drive more speaking engagements, which I do a lot of, and it's a good excuse for a lot of people to have you on their podcast and television show and all that stuff, so which raises awareness and feeds back into all the other things that I did. So that's really what it's for. Now, also, it was for money because I made some nice money on it. But that's the honest, like, what is it for me? Of course, there's a what is it for the reader, because I didn't do this all just selfishly. I did this because I had accumulated a wealth of knowledge about how to become more adaptable. And I felt like I was really sitting on important information at the moment in which people needed it. We're in a moment of great transformation. And I have this benefit of having access to the world's smartest entrepreneurs and people who are just incredibly adaptable and adaptive. And I wanted to understand what they do and help others by collecting and sharing that knowledge, by breaking it down into really actionable steps that you can use to become more adaptable. So it is for an audience and it is for a good purpose, but strategically and career-wise, it also was for something there too.
I love it. That plays a part in both. Let's talk about some of the good finds that are inside of this book.
Yeah.
So there's 4 phases that you outline that we all go through when change arises: panic, adaptation, new normal, wouldn't go back. Mm-hmm. And in the panic phase, you have a quote saying, when someone tries to stop a change rather than try to understand the source of that change, they only hurt themselves in the long run. Mm-hmm. I know for you as a kid, your parents would force you to go to summer camp against your will, but you'd end up loving it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was the last thing you thought you would hate, but you ended up loving? And how does that play into how we respond with panic?
The very last thing was moving to a different neighborhood. I live in Brooklyn, New York. And for many years, my wife and I and our 2 little boys have lived in this tiny apartment in Park Slope, which is like a hip neighborhood with all these great restaurants. And we wanted more space. And to get more space, you really got to like move further out into the borough. And, the further you go out into the borough, just the less hip it is, the fewer restaurants there are, fewer coffee shops. And we started looking at this neighborhood about 2 miles away from where we used to live. And the first couple of times we went out there to look at a house, I'd be like, wow, I like the house, but I hate this neighborhood. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. But the more we looked in our old neighborhood and it didn't have the spaces that we wanted, the more we looked out of our neighborhood and it did have the spaces that we wanted, we eventually decided to just bite the bullet and do it. And so we did. We got this house, which I love. And you know what? Here's the thing. I love the neighborhood too. Like, now that I'm here and I get to know it, it's different, right? Like, this is the thing. It's like we often think that different is worse, but it's not. Different is just different. It's just something else. And so, yeah, fine. I wish there were a few more restaurants here. It's like what everybody around here complains about. But the restaurants that are here are actually quite good. And the coffee shops are cool. And the people are wonderful. And we've made nice friends. And we've only been here a few months. So you just will not really know until you do it.
That's insightful. I recently moved from San Diego to Santa Monica, and I was excited to move to Santa Monica. But something that I kept hearing was that people in LA, they're different.
Yeah.
They're not going to be nice to you. And so far, everyone has been super kind.
Everyone's great. Yeah.
People wave, they smile.
That's right.
I think that's a true testament to what you're saying.
Sure.
Some things you just don't know until it's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. You're going to explain this concept better than I can explain it. However, I'm going to lay down the foundation, tee it up, if you will, and you're going to hit it out of the park. Everyone has a dominant question. It's the question that is at the forefront of their noggin, and it motivates a lot of their actions. Yours is, what am I missing? And I found this piece where I think it highlights a good portion of the what is missing dominant question for you. And it's a time you're interviewing Jimmy Fallon for the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. And he said, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to follow up. And then you found something that was you needed to follow up on. And you followed up with Jimmy. And he loved that because of your thoroughness. And also because no one ever follows up with him, he says. So give me the two sides of the coin as to how our dominant questions can propel us forward or they can hold us back.
Sure. So the dominant question thing comes to me from Jim Quick, who is a world-renowned brain coach, KWIK, Jim Quick. And this came up when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, the dominant question. You know, the way that Jim describes it is your brain is a filtering device. And because you can't absorb and engage with every possible idea and thought. So you have a dominant question that you ask yourself all the time, and it becomes basically the programming for this filtering device. It is the way that you see the world. So what is the question that you were always asking yourself? And if you don't know the answer to that, just start catching yourself in moments of stress, and you'll see the way in which you're kind of posing a question that is driving your actions. I realized, for example, he said that there was he was working with someone they realized that her dominant question was, how can I get people to like me? And if you're asking, how can I get people to like me all the time? You can see immediately what you're going to start doing. I mean, you're going to start shape-shifting. You're going to start to become incredibly deferential to people in the wrong ways. And Will Smith, he said his question was, how can I make this moment magical? Now, the thing is that Will Smith was a client of his, I guess. The thing is that, just to be clear, it wasn't like a random thing that he said in an interview. The thing is that, like, with the dominant question, especially if it's a positive dominant question, if it's kind of meant to be useful, there are still going to be downsides to it, and it's worth always being aware of what your downside is, what it is, like what is it that is helping you and what is creating a blind spot for you because of the question that you're asking. Now, Will Smith is a good example. So Will Smith, he has this question, how can I make this moment magical? That's wonderful, right? That drives you to be creative and thoughtful and to act in a way that benefits others. The problem, as Jim and Will apparently recognized, was that how do I make this moment magical presupposes that the moment isn't already magical, and therefore that it requires you to make it magical, which is not exactly the right attitude you want to walk into every situation with. So they changed it to, how can I make this moment more magical? Like, that is then the question that Will asks himself over and over again, which I really love. I told Jim in our conversation that I think that my dominant question is, what am I missing? Which really started, I think, in journalism. As a reporter, I'm always asking, what am I missing? But then it just started to be a thing that I ask about all of my life. If I'm out, I want to be out later because I want to see what else is going to happen. I want to have more experiences. And so Jim rightly said, this can make you very thorough, but also can drive a kind of FOMO that isn't always healthy. And I think that that's right, and is worth being mindful of how these kinds of things that we're thinking about can be useful, but we also want to be aware of when they're not, so that we can push back against that.
That's a great tool to be aware of, to define your dominant question, and also to be aware of what it already is. So you can reflect on those things and be aware of how this is driving my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And do I need to take control of it and alter it so I can do something either better or different with it?
Totally.
Love it. I got it. I got no segue for this one.
Great.
But I'm going to jump right into it. So I've heard you state this before. For a portion of your career, you had your identity attached to being a newspaper reporter or journalist of some sort.
Yeah.
In the book, you define an entrepreneur as someone who makes things happen for themselves. And then you've also stated that the number one quality for successful entrepreneurs is their ability to adapt. Hence the book. So when in your career did you begin to align yourself more with the entrepreneur identity?
Oh, it wasn't until I got to entrepreneur. First of all, thanks for all the research that you've done. This is very impressive. It wasn't until I got to entrepreneur. I really, before entrepreneur, I did a lot of side projects. I always had a side hustle. I mean, throughout my entire career, I've never just worked a job. I was always freelancing for other places, whether that was writing for other magazines or teaching, or I've created a whole bunch of weird viral websites. But yeah, I don't know that that wasn't in the book. I don't think I talk about that much, but I did. Weird Al Yankovic referenced one in a song, which was fun. But
wow.
I didn't really think of that as being an entrepreneur. I just kind of thought of it as being like a hustler. And it really wasn't until I got to entrepreneur and immersed myself in the culture, Entrepreneur Magazine, that is, and immersed myself in the culture of entrepreneurship and realized that so many different kinds of people were using this word and this identity, and that it wasn't a small business person in a traditional sense anymore. I think that's how the word used to be used, but it is not anymore. And it took me a while to start to absorb that for myself, but I came to recognize that entrepreneurship is as much a mindset as anything else, and the tools of entrepreneurship are incredibly valuable no matter what it is that you do. Now, at this point, I have a media company, I build things, I startup advise, I have all sorts of stuff, so I guess I really do qualify now as an entrepreneur, but I probably didn't at the very beginning when I was more of a media guy who just did some freelancing. But I think you spend enough time with people who think this way, and you start to change the way you think too.
Hi friends, this is Nickolas, Natali, and every Friday at 6 a.m. I bring you a delicious, tasty snack of an episode to help you live a more fulfilling life and level up your business. If you are tuning in right now, consider this your sign to subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening on and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you leave a review, screenshot it, share it to your Instagram story tagging me at Nickolas Natali, and I will reshare it and send you a handshake emoji in your DMs with a big thank you. What's better than a handshake and a sentiment of appreciation? Send this episode to 2 of your friends that you think would enjoy this episode and make their day. All right, back to the episode. I definitely agree with that. It's almost contagious. Like when you see somebody that's taking everything on, they're going all out for it, and they're making something for themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly like you're saying, they may have side hustles, having different passion projects that they're interested in. It's contagious. It makes you want to see what else you could be interested in to pursue.
Totally. It's exciting. And one of the most important things that it does is it just starts to teach you that walls are doors. I think a lot of people just go through life either assuming that the barriers that they see are immovable barriers or imagining barriers where there aren't. And one of the most magical things that entrepreneurs do is that they just don't believe in that, or at least they strive not to believe in that. And so they will either find a way around real barriers, or they will continually test whether a barrier really is a barrier. And once you see enough people do that, you start to think, well, what if I did that too? And suddenly things just start changing, and you start to break what you thought were the rules, but weren't really the rules. And that's when things get interesting.
Yeah, the placebo rules, the things you shouldn't be doing, but nobody said you shouldn't do them.
Yeah.
Just nobody's doing them.
Yeah. It's like, I remember years ago in my magazine column, I once compared people to like dogs with those electrical collar fences, where it's like there's not a physical fence, but you train the dog to where the fence is, and then the dog never crosses the fence. And the funny thing is that at that point, you could take the fence down and the dog will not test it. So the dog really could run free, but it won't. And we do a version of that to ourselves, except that we often are not really facing real barriers at all. We're just facing perceived barriers. And then we decide that the limits of our abilities or our ambitions are wherever these barriers were, and we don't test just by walking over them to discover that they're not there in the first place.
Having been shocked by an electric fence myself, that is a very on-the-nose metaphor for me. So thank you for instilling that.
You're welcome. I have not been shocked, and I hope never to.
Don't do it. Do not do it. All right, Jason. So your mission tagline is, I tell stories in my own voice, which I love. Let's say for some reason, we don't know why, maybe it's the electric fence, you can never write another story again. What has been the most important story you've told so far?
Oh, the most important. I don't even know how to value. I don't know how to answer that. So I will tell you. And the reason I don't know how to answer that is because what you discover once you start putting things out in the world is that you do not really know how it's being received. And you do not know the impact that it has on people. I was on Lewis Howes's podcast a number of months ago, and I thought I did okay at best. Like, I was exhausted that day. Like, we taped it in the morning, and I was like very stupidly, I stayed at a friend's house the night before, and we stayed up talking, and I had a beer, and it interrupted my sleep. And so it was stupid. I was regretting it when I showed up at Lewis's, and I was exhausted. Anyway, I just thought I did a kind of poor performance. But just recently, I was sending the link, the YouTube version of the interview to somebody, and I looked for the very first time at the comments underneath the video, and there was a woman who wrote about how she was sobbing listening to this episode, about how meaningful it was, and other people who were like, I watched this 3 times, and that's wild to me. But it also just goes to show that you just don't know until you put things out in the world. You just don't know how it's going to impact people, and you never really will know. Is the crazy thing. I wish that I could feel and be aware of people experiencing my work, but you can't. It's just you can't. And so the best that I can do is kind of take cues from whatever I do hear about people processing my work, and then continue to put it out. And that's the best I can do. So what's the most important thing that I've put? I just have no idea. But my guess is that if somebody is paying any attention to me, it's because something that I wrote or recorded or said or something helped them in some way or gave them some different way to think about something. I get a lot of people who email me and just say, you changed the way I think, which is just an incredible compliment. So, but what piece was that? Who the hell knows?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I recently listened to this interview, and it was somebody that had a bunch of followers, more followers than I can imagine. And somebody asked him, what do your followers want? And he said, I have no idea. I don't know. And I think it's similar to where you're talking about of you simply keep creating. And as long as it's having a positive impact on people and resonating, striking a chord with them, it's productive. Even if you don't know exactly what it is that's working.
you create a feedback loop of sorts, and
Right.
you should be in touch with your. I mean, I am very mindful of the things that I post that get large responses because it helps me calibrate towards what is meaningful to people now. But oh, I think that person is right. There's no way to know. Here's what you can know, and here's what you can control. What you can control is what intention are you putting behind who you are to someone else. Right? You can control that. Like, what story am I telling people? What am I trying? What pain points am I trying to address? What role am I intending to play in people's lives? And what you'll find is that people who have incredibly large social I was talking to Lewis about this after the recording. People who have really powerful personal brands have spent a lot of time thinking about that. A lot. And like real work. I mean, Lewis, like, he didn't just stumble into this. I mean, he's a smart guy, has a marketing background, and has basically like revised his story over and over again, right? It's like a kind of funny, it's a funny thing that doesn't make sense, I think, if you're not in this world, but if you are, then you get it, right? Like he has stepped back with consultants and just been like, who am I to other people? What is the story of me that I'm telling? It's always a true story, but it's sort of drawing different pieces of information to tell a different story. Or like Lewis was originally a guy who was really focused on helping people in their careers. And now he's broadened out and he's like helping people in their lives. And so you tell a different story of yourself to signal that and to broaden your relevance to people. It's a very interesting and great challenge, but it is the thing. And this is a point that he made to me. It is the thing that you can control. You can't control how people are going to feel about you. You can't control what other people in the space are going to do. You can't control whether like you have more or less of something than other people. But what you can control is like the message that you put out and the way that you present yourself. So you optimize for that and you care the most about that and you hope that it works.
Yeah, that's powerful. Being able to have control of your own story so that you can reach the right people and help them in the most productive way.
Yeah.
In the book, let's get back to the book, baby. In the book, you mentioned that when crisis, change, or innovation strikes that alters the way we live, it should be a teaching lesson for us to be proactive. Through the lens of being proactive, how can we go about building a bridge of familiarity efficiently and not get sucked into loss aversion?
So I'll pick apart a couple of those things. Bridge of familiarity is a concept that I include in the book. My argument being that most people, especially innovators, people introducing new things, will not be aware. They are so convinced of the value of the thing that they have that they forget that it doesn't make sense to other people. And so what we need to do is build a bridge of familiarity, which means understanding where people are, starting with them and what they're comfortable with, and then building a bridge from them to us rather than the other way around. And loss aversion is not my own concept. That's a decades old psychology framework or concept or something. I don't have the right language, but anyway, a loss aversion theory is that we are more concerned with protecting against loss than we are with seeking gain. And that's been borne out in study after study for decades. Very interesting. So what do we do? Look, I think that the first step has to be that we have to recognize what kind of value we're actually. What's our core value? What do we actually have to offer? I mean, you had brought up that mission statement, which is a good place to start, is sort of coming up with the mission statement for yourself so that you understand what it is that you have to offer that is separate from the tasks that you do every day or the role that you occupy. What do you have to offer the world that you could express it infinite number of ways, that there are infinite number of jobs you could hold, businesses that you could build that would ultimately drive that kind of value, right? I tell stories in my own voice. That's my example. But, you could be I solve complex problems person. You could be I help others achieve greatness person. There are so many ways to do that. And once you do, well, you realize that, to speak to the bridge of familiarity, right? If my core is I'm a magazine editor, well, then my job now is to convince people to care about magazines. But but that's a one-way street. That's me with a magazine to sell and trying to get somebody to buy it. But what if it's I tell stories in my own voice? Well, now at that point, it's a question of, what can I tell that's going to be meaningful to others? Let me understand the audience. Let me understand the value. My voice isn't really just about me being me. It's about that, like, I have skill set that I want to use to the maximum available for myself so that I can connect with others. The more that you detach yourself from the specifics of how something has to be done, the more you can get to the doing of the thing that must be done.
That's a great thought. Almost removing ourselves, getting out of the way of ourselves so we can solve the problem.
Yeah.
I love that. Jason, we are rapidly approaching the final question of the podcast, but before we do, I want to say thanks for all that you're doing. One of the big takeaways that I got while researching you was you said content is for relationships.
Yeah.
And that hits home hard for me because it's so true. And I see how you put out content to connect with the world, how you build relationships through the stories you tell, and it's connecting and resonating with people because it's personal and it's also adding value to other people's lives with each story. And I love that. So I want to thank you for everything that you're putting out into the world and the resource that you're being for so many. It's incredible.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. That can't be the final question.
You are correct.
It is not a question. No, but it is a very nice sentiment. I appreciate it, and it's true. Content is for relationships. You put something out in the world, people will spend time with it. If they like it, they will care more about you. And then the question is, what do you do with that?
That is a good question. Maybe that should be the final question. The final question I have for you is, what does it mean to live a fulfilling life?
That is a wonderful philosophical question for which I'm sure there are endless answers. What does it mean to live a fulfilling life? I think that there are too many people in the world for there to be one answer to that, right? I think a conversation that I've heard that I find really fascinating is a conversation about how to define success individually. That one of the great challenges that we have is that we end up absorbing other people's definition of success, and then we measure ourselves against other people's definition of success. And in doing so, we don't have any control over whether or not we are feeling like a success. And that the greatest thing you can do for yourself is to define success for yourself so that you can move towards it and feel in control of it. And I would say that somewhere in that is probably the answer to how to lead a fulfilling life, right? I mean, it has to start with what is fulfilling, not to somebody else, but to you. And then how do you get there? You can spend a lot of time and energy. You can spend your whole life trying to match somebody else's definition or trying to find happiness where you don't exactly trying to find happiness if you have not defined what you're looking for, and I think that the people who I meet who are most satisfied and fulfilled tend to be ones who had defined a path for themselves, whatever that means, and then found ways along the way to appreciate their journey on that path.
It's not following a path, it's following the path that's yours.
Right,
your own
right.
path.
Well, right. So you could, I mean, if you're going to play with articles, it's like, it's not following the path because there isn't the path, but it's following your path.
That's great. Incredible. Love it. Jason, where can people connect with you on the internet? Where can they find your book? All of that good stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks for getting the book. Thanks for reading it. Thanks for immersing yourself in my work. I really appreciate it. I'm honored. So the book is available wherever you find books. It's called Build for Tomorrow, audiobook, ebook, hardcover, whatever your preference is, everything but stone tablet. And so that's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, probably your local airport. And then otherwise, you can go to my website, jasonfeifer.com, where you can find links to all my other work, my newsletters, get in touch on social, and so on.
Awesome. All those links will be in the show notes. Go check them out. Say hi to Jason. Get his book. Read his book. Jason, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
That was the episode. You just listened to it. Jason Feifer, dropping knowledge bombs. Do you feel ready to build for tomorrow? I know I do. That episode got me jazzed. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and share this episode with a friend you admire most. It'll take 5 seconds, it'll make their day, and is a wonderful use of your screen time. But the real reason you're still here, you want to know the answer to the riddle of the week. How much does it cost to swim with sharks? At least an arm and a leg. I'm just going out on a limb here, but that's pretty expensive. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next Friday at 6 a.m. Be kind, be strong, be disciplined. Woo!